Anyway, on to our final speaker, who is Rabbi David Mason. Rabbi David Mason was brought up in Edinburgh and obtained 2 degrees from the London School of Economics before moving to Israel to study to become a rabbi. Rabbi Mason returned to the UK in 2003 to lead the Kingston, Surbiton and District Synagogue for 5 years. In 2008, he was appointed the rabbi of Muswell Hill Synagogue in London, and he's still there currently. Rabbi Mason recently added another degree by studying an MA in conflict resolution in divided societies at King's College in London. Furthermore, he's one of the chairs of the Eco Synagogue Mosque. And finally, Rabbi David Mason has a strong interest in this topic on organ donation. And he's spoken about it on many occasions. And you are now going to hear from him speaking from a Jewish legal perspective. Over to you, Rabbi David Mason. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really nice to be here. I should just make it clear that it was the Eco Synagogue, not the Eco Synagogue Mosque. You know, there is one in Cambridge I'd like to get to know. I should also add that I'm an Arsenal fan, I'm afraid. For any of the United fans I can see. At least we come together after a draw. Yes, so, and obviously, as you can see from my, at least academic background, conflict resolution, politics and economics, you wouldn't be the ideal person for this. I mean, of course, I'm not the ideal. There are many more expert than me that we go to, but I've been asked by the Board of Deputies, and I have a close relationship with the Chief Rabbi in their office. So this is a really relevant and important issue. And yes, I have looked into it quite a lot over the last few years. Great speeches before. Thank you, Dr. Jeremy. Really, really super. And Mansur as well. And I feel almost that how I'm going to lay it out in some ways maps Mansur, obviously different trajectory in terms of the religion, but an interesting similarity to looking at how do we deal with a situation in law where we've got multiple opinions, and yet we know that the trajectory scientifically and the trajectory of need is to increase the number of donations that we have, and therefore, of course, accept that a brainstem death is a relevant factor in considering death, so that we can do that. And so it's really tricky. It's a modern problem, I suppose, in a way. There was a time, I suppose, before recent 20th century, I suppose, technological developments where the cessation of heart action, activity and breathing would have come very similar in time. There wouldn't have been much separation between them. And so in a sense, the controversy about the separation between final irreversible cessation of breathing and the end of heart activity, they would have been much closer. That controversy wouldn't have been. It's very interesting that in the 18th century, I found out that in Mecklenburg in Germany, decided that he wanted to delay burials for 3 days, because even although for bodies the heart had stopped, it seemed, and breathing had, there were situations where people were not fully dead. And so they wanted to be careful and make sure that they buried. The Jewish community was up in arms about this, because there is a Jewish value to burying very soon after death, immediately as soon as possible after death. It's interesting, by the way, for a bit of trivia, which I absolutely love, it's where the term dead ringer comes from, because what they would do is they'd have in coffins in those days, they'd have a hole in the coffin with a bell going up to ground level. And if you were alive down there, you hadn't actually fully died, you'd ring the bell. You would then come out. People would say, my gosh, you look very like that one that was alive. You're a dead ringer for that person because you rung the bell. So there you are. If that's all you go away with this evening, I mean, you know, you'll be very happy. So, of course, with the ability to resuscitate, the ability to give people the possibility to breathe artificially, right, we then were able to separate the time of the end of breathing from the end of cardiological function, the end of heart stopping. That was a big thing. Suddenly we had 2 different moments here. One where, yes, if someone had had a massive trauma to the brain stem would be destroyed. and then breathing would not return, person wasn't going to live again. They're not going to breathe again, but through ventilation, the heart could still pump, and there could be a gap between those two moments. So that almost threw up an issue for Jewish law. And of course, in the 60s, when brain death was then brain stem death, or was considered to be the moment of cessation of life, then of course, again, that became really, really important for halakhic authorities to start thinking about how we react to that. What on earth do we do? Jewish people weren't just in Israel, of course. Israel was a young state. There were large communities in America, rabbis in America, and Britain and Europe had to deal with these issues. And of course, most countries decided, and most physicians, that brain death was the point of fixing of time of death. It became an accepted thing. If I remember reading, Denmark initially didn't accept it. There were certain communities, was it Japan possibly, where because of cultural religious reasons, but generally, certainly in the developed world, in the Western world, if we say, it was accepted. And what's interesting in Judaism is that in the Talmud, many of you might know, the Talmud is a repository of legal writings, which was brought together about 1500 years ago. There's no mention of what is the moment of death. You can't go back to the Talmud. It wasn't ever something that would have been discussed. In fact, I remember reading, I read this earlier today, that it was almost assumed that it was known when people died, and therefore never really discussed. So you can't go back and see what is that point. There are two, however, classical texts, which I'll put to you now, which almost run the gamut of, similar to Mansur, a varied, in a sense, range of approaches to this initial problem. And what is this initial problem? Is the moment of death. Are taking someone's organ after, especially an important organ like the heart, after the moment of death, fine. But if they haven't fully died legally, if they haven't fully died according to Jewish law, then you are taking their life. If they haven't fully died, they are in Jewish law called a gosses. A gosses is someone who is going to die. They're not going to live. It's irreversible, but they have not yet died. And we are bid to be incredibly careful with the individual who is a gosses. And therefore, it would be prohibited to take the organ. So it's all to play for in that. And you will come out with these two texts, almost a range of approaches, along with other Jewish values as well, which I'll bring to you from, you cannot give organs, and it's so similar to Mansur, to, yes, we can in tandem with where science is now. And I think it's also about what is the legal religious mind. I'm talking from a Jewish perspective. I'm sure this maps into Islam as well. There is the desire on the one hand to maintain tradition, and also the parallel desire, they don't always work together, to, in a sense, with the rubric of law, to be able to work with society. Because at the end of the day, we are talking about saving lives. That is a Jewish value. Pikuach nefesh is a Jewish value. Now, pikuach nefesh means to reveal the soul, right? You might have anyone heard that term, pikuach nefesh? Pikuach nefesh is a weird term because it really, to save a life in Hebrew, is lehatzil nefesh, hatzalat nefashot. Pikuach nefesh comes from a Talmudic situation, a Talmudic case of an individual who is covered by a wall that has fallen on him. Stones are covering him, and we do not know, and it's Shabbat. And I'm not allowed to uncover that wall on Shabbat. I can't uncover the stones, says the Talmud. So, but this guy might be alive. This individual person, man, woman, who knows, might be alive. So what do I do now? So, of course, if they're alive, and if we have any doubt they're alive, we save them. We open up the wall. Pikuach means to open up, to uncover the person. And we're told you do. And there are different opinions as to when I should be happy that this person is either dead or alive. If I go from the top down, from the person's head down, and I feel the breath of this individual, or I don't, or if there is no breathing, they are now dead, I stop. I don't carry on anymore. What you do with the body is another story, and that's not really what these are crazy cases often that you get in our Jewish or any religious legal text. If I start from the bottom, from the feet, and come up, and I hear and I feel the heart, and the heart's pumping, fine, of course, the person's life. If it's not, there is an argument as to whether I still need to carry on and feel the breath says you should carry on. The other says, no, it's enough. So it seems to sort of lean towards breathing being the main element of life. And actually, the verse is quoted in this statement. Vayipach b'apav nishmat chaim. In Genesis, we're told God blew into the individual, the human, the first person, the breath of life, as if the person's life force is essentially in the breathing. So that's a statement, that's a sort of a situation, a case study in the Talmud. It can be used to understand that breathing, remember this is 1500 years ago, there was no knowledge of resuscitation, of artificial breathing systems, of there's no knowledge of that at all. The parallel text is a situation of a lizard whose head, sorry for anyone who's a bit whose head is decapitated, and yet the body of the lizard still moves. The question is, once that lizard is now dead, it causes impurity. The Mishnah, the statement says it does still cause impurity. In other words, right? In other words, even although it's still moving, the animal is dead. And that text is used by people to say that even if a person never breathes again, any other motion or movement, in this case, the heart pumping, its existence, its functioning, right, is considered extraneous. It's not considered life. Of course, other opinions said, no, the heart is essential. You cannot compare the decapitation, right, the crushing of the individual animal through decapitation to a person who is complete, right, who is complete, but only the heart which is essential as well, still going. So these two texts lend themselves to a plurality of different opinions all the way down. And it was only in the 19th century that a rabbi called Moshe Sofer decided on needing three different conditions for death: heart, breathing, and being still, being stationary. And from then on, we have had constantly a large amount of controversy. In Israel, brainstem death was basically accepted. Now, the conditions with brainstem death means we need to be absolutely sure that it will be irreversible. So in Jewish law, we need to know that there are extra conditions. Brainstem has ceased. If I just get 1 or 2 minutes more, because there are important points I want to put in here. I'm just thinking about the time I had, but I understand. So there are other issues here that also Jewish people need to deal with. You cannot have benefit from the body. How can I square off taking an organ from a body, even a dead body, right, dead body, with the idea that I can't benefit from the dead body? Rabbis dealt with that. Maybe the organ lives anew in a new person, and therefore it's okay. I have to bury everything of a person. Do I have to bury them complete? Well, again, if an organ is taken and it's acceptable that they are dead, then you are burying them complete. The new organ that you've taken for another person to whom you've donated that organ, it lives in them as a new organ within that person. And what's left technically of the individual who's deceased is their complete body. So that can be dealt with. We also say that you're not allowed to denigrate the dead body. For some, this means you can never give organs. Of course, many organs don't have the problem, the cornea, the kidney. Many don't run the gauntlet of an issue of death, and that's okay. I would add in to finish that, of course, the change of the law, Cllr Max's law, the change of the law to din consent, obviously threw up worries for the Jewish community. The Chief Rabbi's office with the Board of Deputies worked very well with NHS blood and transplant and ensured that there is a faith element in the register. So everyone who registers can, in a sense, put in their own faith, its importance, and a rabbi for Jewish community and obviously clergy will be able to be involved in decision-making around organ donation so that their opinion, because there are varied opinions, right? The London Bet Din, which is Chief Rabbi of the Jewish community, the United Synagogue, my own Orthodox community, does hold by heart as the point of death, but many will differ. There are many individuals who will feel differently than that and will want their rabbi to go with them. So of course it was a short amount of time. I'd really appreciate the time to talk, and I hope I was able to get a flavor over of a Jewish approach to this really, I mean, in 10 minutes it's just mad because it's such a complicated issue.
Yes.